And we said, well, what is it that you need from young people now? And he said, it's interesting. What they're getting now are people who are technically qualified for the job. They have all the sort of skills they technically need, but they don't have the resilience. They're not able to cope with all the uncertainty, with all the change, with all the crises. He said they used to have a crisis once every decade or so, big crisis, like a global financial crisis. Now it's every year, and people are struggling to cope.
Good morning to everybody. And as Mihaly so nicely wrapped it up, it was an exciting day yesterday. So I hope you are all in a high spirit this morning. And actually, whilst we're thinking about it, Wayne, I think Mihaly triggered us to give some book recommendations. And of course, we will hear a lot about your book, Thriving the Breakthrough Movement. But I also would like to recommend Henry Mintzberg on Rebalancing Society. That was a book that stuck with me recently and might be of interest to the readers. And I want to kick us off with a quote by Susanna Arundhati Roy, the Indian poet and author, which came out in the Financial Times at the beginning of the pandemic, but still might be pertinent to the session that Wayne and I will engage in this morning, which is all about sustainability. Why is it failing and whence are we going? And Arundhati Roy at the beginning of the pandemic wrote, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatreds, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through it lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. And I thought that might be an interesting entry to our conversation about the Great Reset. But before I move any further, because I already introduced myself yesterday, Wayne, do you want to position yourself in this wonderful question of the breakthrough movement? What brings you to this table?
Thanks, Otti, and good morning, everyone, wherever you may be. Well, I've spent more than 30 years now working on issues of sustainability. I was studying at a time business studies in Cape Town in South Africa when we were just in the lead up to the original Rio Earth Summit, the greatest gathering of heads of state then and since. And that's when we really put sustainable development on the global agenda. And so I got involved at that stage. I got curious. I joined other young people from around the world at a conference in Japan. And we gave our input to that conference. And really, it's been a journey since then. And always the question is, how do we go further, faster? Because we know that we're doing more than ever before, but we also know that many of the problems are getting worse.
And very, very exciting. I think you and I are both very passionate about positive transformation. So what we want to touch on a little bit in a conversational interview. So I will try to bring you more about Wayne's wisdom from his book and from his life, whilst giving a few of the views that I shared with you yesterday, so that between Wayne and I, we can bring you some thoughts about what the problem is with CSR and sustainability. Why is it failing today, or why has it failed, as Wayne was saying, from the early moments of the movement to now? We do not see the speed of change that we require. To then go to the question, what can we do about it? What's our opportunity as businesses, as individuals? And then finally, what is the takeaway? What's the call for action? Where can we go? How can everybody help? And I think, Wayne, I want to start you off before I go into the question, why is CSR failing? What are the root causes? With a positive spirit. And I took from your book, of course, I like poetry. So from your book, I'm taking a quote where you write, our life is so much more than a duty or a chore of merely getting by without a why or what for. The law of tooth and claw, the struggle to exist, to rally and resist against life's slow decay, the way of entropy, of living just to see another day, to stay, to endure and survive. No, life is meant to thrive. And I love this entry in your book, this spirit. Why are we failing, Wayne? What's the problem?
Well, firstly, what do we mean by failure? You know, if you look at a doctor, then you would judge a doctor by whether the patient is getting better or worse. And I think that's the sense in which, I mean, we are failing through our efforts, CSR, sustainability, whatever we call it, despite more activity than ever before. If we look at the trends, if we look at climate change, if we look at biodiversity loss, if we look at inequality, if we look at corruption, these are not problems that we're making much headway on in the last few decades. And so something about our approach isn't working. Now, to put a little bit of evidence behind that, some research by Cranfield University a few years ago asked younger leaders and incumbent leaders, they called them current and future leaders, whether they think business has a social purpose, a clear social purpose. 9 out of 10 current leaders said, yes, absolutely, we're doing a great job. Only 2 out of 10 future leaders, younger leaders, believe that business is delivering a clear social purpose. So there's a big generation and expectations gap there. In fact, 56% of people, young people today, believe that capitalism is doing more harm than good. And some other research that was done recently suggests that there is now a group of people called the Tireds. That stands for 30-something independent, radical, educated dropouts. These are young people who are very ambitious, very capable. They're rising up through the ranks of organizations. They hit their early 30s and they leave those organizations. And the reason, they say, is because they want less demand and deeper reward. Less demand, of course. Do they want to be working 12-hour days? Deeper reward, what's it all about? Can I get excited about increasing the sales or the market share? Probably not. So this is what we mean. This is the gap. It's really a trust gap, I think, in business. And it's failing, if I look specifically at CSR and sustainability, for 3 reasons. One is that these have remained, for many companies, peripheral. They sit on the side. I sometimes say that sustainability for many companies, it's like, their main business is the juicy fast food burger and fries, and sustainability is the little salad on the side, which hardly anybody touches. The second thing, and that's especially true of CSR, by the way, it's treated very much still for many as philanthropy, as a bit of charity, giving back, but not changing anything fundamentally. The second reason is that many of our interventions on sustainability have been incremental. So they've been aligned behind that old approach of total quality management, continuous improvement. Many of the standards are based on that. And so we set our own goals and we make slow incremental improvements towards those goals. The problem is that the challenges we face are large, urgent, and getting worse rather rapidly. So we're not keeping up. The last reason is that I think for many, sustainability or CSR is seen as uneconomic. In other words, it's seen as a cost. And we see this being tested right now in our cost of living crisis, our energy crisis. Warren Buffett used to say, you only know who's been swimming naked when the tide goes out. Well, I think that's the case for many companies now. You see they're being exposed on sustainability because they're not really that committed. It's the first thing that they cut. And so we have to understand sustainability as an investment, not as a cost. It does have returns, but not immediate. So that's the setup, why it's failing.
Very, very interesting. I will add just one thought that I offered yesterday, which is intrinsic to what you say, Wayne, which I think it goes back to how we think. So the interventions that I've seen many times with SDGs and similar projects and programs, they do not change. And I think that's also what you say and what the testimony you show proves. They do not change our basic way of thinking. And if we don't start by taking accountability and stopping to hope that the invisible hand of the market will get things right, or regulation, right? It has to start with us taking a different stance in regards to responsibility for the world. Nothing will ever change, because the problem is with, as they say, negative freedoms, right? Where people want freedom to be isolated. Negative freedoms will always create negative externalities. If I'm not thinking about caring about others, somewhere something will go wrong. And I think the more so in complexity, right? And we cannot, compliance is not going to fix it. Right? Ticking the box exercises in organizations, and I've seen it in banks, right? They will drive a certain type of behavior, but they don't drive responsibility, because people will only do what is necessary to stay out of jail and keep the business license. It will not trigger them to do good. Actually, it will do the opposite. All our research proves that people who are forced by regulation to do things feel that their original predisposition to do good is being crowded out. So they do what is necessary, but they don't do what is good. Between doing right and doing good, there's a big difference. So I think we need to, probably goes back to education. But let's move to the second question. And Wayne, I think in your book, you're writing about it extensively. What can we do about it? How can we thrive? What is the hopeful message that you can give?
Yeah, well, there are three things I think that need to change. One is we need to change the goal. And until now, for many companies, for business, they've been sold the idea that sustainability is the goal. And we now have 17 sustainable development goals. And I think this is a little bit, this is one of the reasons why we're falling short, because if you think about it, what is sustainability? Literally, it means to continue, to endure, to survive. And that's a little bit like saying that our reason for living is to breathe. Well, of course, we have to breathe, but is that really what gets us inspired? Is that really what gets the energy we need to make the changes we need? And that's why I call for a different goal, which is thriving. And thriving is something qualitatively different. If you wake up in the morning and you turn to your partner, do you say, I'd love for us to have a sustainable relationship? Probably not. Or if you do, maybe not for too long. But no, if you were to say, I want a thriving relationship, or I want our family to thrive, I want our company to thrive, our city to thrive, we know that that's different. That's something more. Now, the jargon that's crept in around this is also the idea of net positive. This is what Paul Polman, former CEO of Unilever, writes about together with Andrew Winston, or regeneration. This is what Paul Hawken writes about. Flourishing is another sort of term, but it's something about going beyond. Until now, sustainability, I mean, I think, that saying you should shoot for the stars and you might hit the moon. I think sustainability has been shooting for the moon and barely getting off the ground. So we really need to be more ambitious in our goals, and we can get into it if we have time, the 6 great transitions we have to make in order for those goals to be higher. The second thing we have to change is our mode of operations. You were alluding to this in talking about tick box exercises and so on. Mostly we've managed sustainability as we would anything else, as we manage HR, as we manage marketing, finance. We've turned it into a management system. Now, nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't get us to where we need to go fast enough. And it doesn't get us to the scale. So the mode we have to change is from management to innovation, because we don't get to where we need to go without really transforming, what we're doing and how we're doing it. So if a mode of innovation, and again, we can talk about that further. The third thing we have to change, which is the most difficult, is the system itself, because it's the system that's broken. Our economic system has helped hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It's worked in many ways, but it has reached its limits. And what we've really been doing is trading off economic value, which, by the way, every couple of years gets totally destroyed as well through a financial crisis, but economic value, social value, which isn't equally distributed around the world. Some people are getting that social value, other people are being exploited as labor. But we've traded those off against environmental value, if you like. We've degraded the planet to the extent that we really are facing huge tipping points and breakdowns. So we have to change the system, and that's very complex, but that's also very exciting because it can change very fast when you get it right. This is about changing the norms. It is about changing policy, how the markets work. It's about social movements, and it's about technology.
Very interesting. And I think even by listening to you, Wayne, it's already clear this is not an easy thing. It will require discipline, it will require effort, it will require many people to come along and endorse it, right? So I think there's, again, something we need to take a stance as a society. And I think what comes to my mind whilst you were saying this, it's kind of funny, right? I remember being in conversations 15 years ago about the fact that GDP, gross domestic product, isn't a great indicator for societal success. Here we are in 2022, still measuring mainly through GDP, where as a society we're making progress. It's ridiculous. But it also shows that we had the Zen Fitoussi report, Stiglitz report 10 years ago, I think, when it was given to the French public, right, with new indicators. They haven't been implemented, right? So the good ideas are not lacking. So the question is how to grasp those opportunities that you describe. How do we make leeway? What do we need to put the wheels in motion? And here I think, as you say, the system makes it hard, because I remember in my career, before I joined the great resignation, that very often I would find myself at the end of the quarter with my CFO saying, Otti, no, we need to save costs, we need to reduce personnel, whatever it might be, because the stock markets demand it. Right? So very often good people find themselves in bad businesses, so to speak, or good businesses find themselves in an economy that will easily crowd out those businesses that want to do good and that might have higher costs on that basis, right? And you say innovation might help us, but indeed I think, as you say, it needs to be a systemic approach, right? We need actors at different levels. So I think I want to spend a little bit of time on the pragmatic side, because I realized we have 5 to 10 minutes left. I think we started a little bit late. So let's take it. I think Michaeli will be okay if we take 10 minutes. So I want to ask you, from your experience, and maybe going a little bit into those 6 changes that you envisage, Wayne, if you want to, but where do you see business? And speaking to the HR audience here, right? What would you give them as homework, so to speak? Where do you think people can make a difference?
Yeah, well, one of the things I would say is that we are still, to your point, using the wrong metrics, but there is a huge change going on there. I mean, we are getting new metrics. We have the stakeholder capitalism metrics. We have new reporting requirements in Europe. So we are figuring out what better metrics could look like. That's part of the change, and that's part of the pragmatic change what you measure. But at the end of the day, it's mostly about changing societal norms. And you do that in many different ways. You do that through social movements. You do it by questioning the purpose of business. There was a very significant year we had in 2019 where we had a statement by the Business Roundtable, 181 CEOs around the world of many of the biggest companies, saying that actually the purpose of business is not to make money for shareholders. We have a stakeholder purpose. We had that reinforced by the Davos Manifesto, restating what they believe the purpose of business is around stakeholders. And we had Larry Fink as well, BlackRock, largest investor in the world, also putting out a letter to CEOs saying the purpose of business is not just to make money. So that's definitely part of changing the norms. But then, as you say, we have these big transitions, and really business needs to align behind them and realize that where there are breakdowns, there are also breakthroughs. To just put them briefly on the map. So what we need to do is go from degradation of ecosystems to restoration. We do that through an eco-services economy. To go from depletion of resources to renewal through a circular economy. To go from disparity or inequality to responsibility, that's a lot about diversity and inclusion, through an access economy. To go from disease to revitalization through a well-being economy. To go from disconnection, which is unequal access to technology, to rewiring through a digital economy, using technology to solve our social and environmental problems. And to go from disruption, which was nicely introduced by Mihaly, to resilience in a risk economy. So these are the big transitions. For HR specifically, I think there are three things worth really thinking about. The first is that point around resilience. What can we do to help our staff, our workforce, our teams become more resilient? I had an insight on this recently. One of my chair partners at the Antwerp Management School is the Port of Antwerp Bruges. We asked them to come and speak to students, and they presented their strategy. And we said, well, what is it that you need from young people now? And he said, it's interesting. What they're getting now are people who are technically qualified for the job. They have all the sort of skills they technically need, but they don't have the resilience. They're not able to cope with all the uncertainty, with all the change, with all the crises. He said they used to have a crisis once every decade or so, big crisis, like a global financial crisis. Now it's every year, and people are struggling to cope. I've done some work with Randstad, one of my other chair partners, creating what we call a future resilience index. And this has a lot of relevance, I think, for HR. There are 10 elements. It's things, like how do you create dynamic employability? How do you ensure diversity? How do you ensure participative governance, purposeful motivation, and so on? So I think that's worth really reflecting on. How do we work on resilience? The second is, how do we rethink leadership? A lot of my research has actually been around this for Cambridge and for others. And what we find is we need a different set of characteristics in our leaders in order to take us where we need to go. And it's things like the ability to think systemically, to be inclusive, to have moral courage, to have that innovation mindset. So, I think it's important to rethink leadership as well. And the last one, I think, was touched on by Mihaly also in the summary from yesterday, or maybe coming up today as well, is the question of culture. What is the culture that you're creating in your workplace? And is it a culture of transformation, of allowing people to fail and experiment, but always moving to a larger social purpose? Or is it about just hitting those targets for financials? And I think that really, really makes a difference.
Very interesting. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, please put them on the chat now. We might be able to take one or so. I want to just, taking the privilege of being a business leader, I want to make Wayne's challenge to everybody listening even more concrete. Yesterday, I said HR should glue themselves to the boardroom tables and insist on making some of those changes that Wayne speaks about. I think I want to build, as you've seen in the slide that Mihaly shared earlier, from culture, which, as Dave Snowden says, is a descriptive property of a human system, to character. Character is something that is being impacted by changes in the daily routines, the habits of an organization. And I think, as Wayne describes characteristics we want from leaders, actually we want them as characteristics of the organizational system. We want a trustworthy organization, and that starts with not only the individuals, because very often, as John Lurie said, it's not the individuals, it's the system. So HR needs to, I think, help us with making sure that the system reinforces those positive characteristics, those, as I would call them, virtues, those character elements, right? And if we continue with old style anachronistic non-working performance management, where we pay our CEOs 300x bonuses or insist on short-term profit measures, as Wayne is pointing out, it's not going to work. So I think, again, my plea to HR is, as Wayne said, ask those questions, ask those why questions and be serious about it. Because when I speak to the young people Wayne mentioned, they just look at me and say, Otti, you are of the generation that caused us all the issues. Frankly, you're not going to fix it.
Yeah.
The trust of the youngsters and people like us talking wisely at these conferences is very, very limited in my experience, because they've seen that we caused the mess. And net positive, with all my love for Andrew and Paul Pullman, is not going to hit it. It's not about net positive. It's not being a little bit more positive than negative. No, it's about stopping the bad things we're doing today, right? It's about making a true difference, standing up for what is right. And that might create some suffering. That requires some discipline and courage. And I think we are still fooling ourselves that all of this is not going to come at a cost. It's going to come at a cost. And it's right that it comes at a cost, because it's a cost for good. And we should be proud to sustain those costs, because it is the right thing to do. That's what is making us adults, not children, because we are able and willing to step into accountability for this world, which, by the way, as I'm sure at that Rio conference Wayne mentioned, is not ours to give. The world is not ours to sell out. We only have one of these worlds. It's there for our children's and our children's children and for everybody else. We are not here to exploit it and make it die, right? So we need to have the courage to stand up for what is right. Wayne, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think the most exciting thing is that, the system changes when we all change. And although we talk about leadership these days is not always the person at the top. One of the things we learn from studying complex living systems is that they self-organize. If you look at an ant colony, which is a very complex social system, they're out there foraging for food, defending the nest, growing mushrooms underground, feeding the queen. She's not the leader, she just lays eggs. They take out the trash, they bury the dead, all self-organized. And that's because of the complexity in the system. So everybody can be a part of that solution. And because it's so complex and interconnected today, you never know whether your action, your changing what you do, might be that tipping point that takes us into the positive change. So I'm going to be cheeky, and I know we have to end off, but I'm going to be cheeky and end with a poem, because it is something I like to mix in there, and just something that I think challenges us all. And it's a poem called "A Place to Thrive." Is the world a better place because we lived and loved and learned? What will our children have to face because of what we built and burned? Are people better than before because we gave them dignity? What happened to the sick and poor while we were living strong and free? Is the world a fairer place because we fought for equal rights? Who lost for us to win our race? Or did we open up new heights? Is nature thriving, great and small, because we walked upon the earth? Did oceans rise and species fall with every breath we took since birth? Is the world a dying place because our enterprises grew? Did we destroy our living space, or did we seed the world anew? Each day we get to use our voice to raise the tide or let it ebb. Each day we face a simple choice: to nurture life or fray its web. Let's let the world be better still for every moment we're alive, because we choose to use our will to make our earth a place to thrive. Thank you.
Very nice. Applause virtually. And with that, I think we have to close. There are 2 questions on the chat by Paul Levison and Joseph, which I think we will answer offline. And I think I will close with the notion of Giampiero Pittiglieri to say his metaphor for leaders is a poet and a plumber. I think Wayne was the poet. I'm today the plumber. So make sure you bring, please, both of these aspects together and make a positive change. Thank you very much, and have a great day and a great conference. Back to you, Mihaly.
Thanks, absolutely brilliant, gentlemen. Thank you so much, and I hope our audience definitely enjoyed. And what I'm going to do, this is a piece which we'll be certainly releasing very, very soon. some of the question was where to start in HR. Well, play this video to your leaders. Simple as that.